Your tax return was due on October 31. And I wonder if you're one of those people who kind of left it at the last minute, maybe does that every year. For many people, doing a tax return is a real chore, a real burden, a real inconvenience. So we put it off as long as we can. We wait until we see the Halloween decorations come out before we start to think, I'd better knuckle down and do this. There are other people, of course, who keep all their receipts in order the entire year round, and as soon as the financial year clicks around on July 1, they're pretty much ready to submit their tax return in the first week or two. Maybe that's people, though, also who dislike doing it but want to get it over and done with. Regardless of when you do your tax return is an opportunity to reflect for yourself on generosity. Because as you know, in our tax returns, there's an opportunity for us to state our income, but also for us to state how much we gave to tax-deductible charities that year, and that becomes a deduction of our income. For example, if you earn $100,000 a year and you gave $5,000, well, you pay tax not on the $100,000, but on the $95,000, which is a considerable discount, and that often comes back to us as our tax return, tax refund later in the year. So it's an opportunity for us to reflect on generosity. So I invite you to think, did you have an amount you could put on your tax return this year of how much you gave to tax-deductible charities? About half of all charities in Australia are tax-deductible. Churches like ours are not, donations to churches are generally not tax-deductible, but to specific giving within churches like St Vincent de Paul Society, Catholic Care's Homeless Appeal, the Pastoral Works Fund, these things are tax-deductible. And many, many wonderful charities throughout Australia give a tax deduction. And so we can claim that in our tax return. So pause for a moment and think, did I have an amount? How much did I give to charity this year, whether I could claim a deduction or not? Generosity is, of course, a wonderful virtue, and it's what Jesus points to and praises in the gospel today. When Jesus points out the poor widow who places 2 small coins in the temple treasury and says she is giving more than the many people who before her who gave much, much larger amounts, but for whom they had far greater wealth, for whom that was a much smaller percentage of their capacity to give. Now, we've got to look for a moment and say, some people now comment that perhaps this is actually not a good thing. Perhaps Jesus is not praising what this woman is doing, but seeing her as a victim of the temple structure, which, as he said in the previous passage, demands that we swallow up the income of poor widows. So perhaps Jesus gives that speech and then points to this woman and says, look at what you're doing to people like her. When there's contested passages like this, it's helpful for us to go back and see, what does the first reading in Mass say? Because the first reading is always chosen by the church to point towards and shed light on the gospel passage. And so we read in the book of Kings of the widow of Zarephath who shares her last meal with the prophet Elijah. In doing so, she shows great, extraordinary generosity. And in doing so, the miracle occurs where the jar of meal does not run out. And so we can see there, this is praiseworthy generosity by a woman who is poor, who shares her very last meal. Perhaps in this moment, there are people around the world who do exactly that. In Gaza, in Ukraine, there are probably people who have next to nothing. They have their last meal, and yet they share it with their neighbours. There are people who are like that, who have that kind of extraordinary, extraordinary generosity. Let's pray for them today and pray that we would be like them too. So Elijah clearly praises the widow's generosity, and so Jesus, we can see then, is praising the widow's generosity in giving those 2 small coins to the treasury. And it's not how much she gives that matters. Clearly the larger amounts given by the wealthy people did more good. The temple could do more good with that amount of cash. But rather, what Jesus is praising is the action of the person who gave out of their small means, gave generously. And that's the kind of virtue that Jesus, I think, summons forth from us and in us. Jesus, a number of times in the Gospels, talks about the mustard seed being the small seed that grows into a great tree. He praises the small boy who contributes the little bit of food he has, the 2 fish and the 5 loaves of bread, which he can then multiply into a meal to feed thousands. When we give a little, it counts as great generosity on our part. And so Jesus praises this woman who gives this small amount. You might recall a couple of weeks ago I spoke about the young people in our parish who went off on a mission and service trip and were so excited about the good they were able to do. Now, in fact, the good work they were doing painting a school could have been done by local people in the country they went to. These young people didn't need to go there to do it. But in fact, what mattered was not the good work that got done, but the generosity of the young people who did it. And I think it's the same thing here. It's not the amount we give or what the end result might be with our dollars, but it's how much we are participating in giving. And in doing so, we cultivate the virtue of generosity. I invite you to do that, to cultivate the virtue of generosity in yourself. Your tax return is a way to help measure that. Am I being generous? As Australians, we like to think we are generous, and we are when big tragedies happen. When there's the flood, when there's the bushfire, we give and we give big. But we're actually not that good at regular, consistent giving week after week, month after month to charity. Philanthropy Australia said that our average giving, about 70% of Australians give regularly to charity, and the average giving is about $15 a week, which is okay, it's certainly something, but it's not a lot compared to the average Australian salary, which is $75,000 to $80,000. So it's around about 1%. You say the average Australian gives 1% of their salary or income to charity. So I wonder, is that the right amount? It's less than half of what New Zealanders give. We always like to compete with New Zealand. They are twice as generous as we are. So we've got some catching up to do. But in the end, it's up to you to decide what is right for you. There are churches that insist that people give 10% of their income to the church, let alone other charities beyond that. It's how we get Hillsong-type churches with million-dollar sound systems. They can do incredible things because everyone's giving bucket loads. But we as a church don't expect that or demand that. We make no expectation of how much anyone should give. What you give is between you and God and your conscience. But nonetheless, I invite you to consider giving a percentage as a way of ensuring that you do give regularly. The percentage is up to you. And because our income may well fluctuate over our lifetime, giving a percentage means the amount will change over time as well, but it means we are committed to giving. When I got my first job way back in the 90s, and I think I earned the princely sum of $212 a week, which wasn't much, but I made the decision that I should give, so I tried to give 10% of that amount, which was not a whole lot, it was $20 a week. But when I went to seminary the next year and I didn't have an income, I had a small stipend of about $40 a week, I think. I could give $4 a week. It wasn't much, but I tried to keep giving that little amount. Because it meant then once I was ordained a priest and then had a regular income again, it's modest but it's reasonable, then I've actually had a much larger amount I've been able to give over the years, and as my income increased with inflation, I've been able to give more and more as well. So I encourage you to consider, is there an amount that you could give regularly? Because it's regular giving that marks us out as generous. And if we do have a commitment to give, it has a nice little side effect too. It means the people who call you on the phone or come up to you in the street and saying, hey, can I have a minute of your time and talk to you about a charity that I want to sign you up for? You can say, look, sorry, I actually am committed to a charity already. You can say even what that charity is. And so you can look them in the eye and say, I am being generous. I'm not being cheap by saying no to you. I'm being generous, but I'm already committed in a way that I planned out well in advance rather than being swayed on the moment. So this is not a speech saying, please give money to the church. We do that every year, but that's not right now. This is simply inviting you to take up the invitation the gospel has, to become like the poor widow that Jesus praised and the widow of Zarephath, to be able to give deeply and generously in a way that marks out our character's generosity, our character which might then draw from Jesus, who is generous to the point of giving his life on the cross.